Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello. Welcome to Points of View. It's Sunday the 13th of April. This is our regular chance to discuss, debate and everything in between with our range of fantastic Teachers Talk Radio panelists and contributors to talk about the stories that matter and the points of view that matter in the world of education from the week gone by. I've got Will Mercer, Tojinder Gill, Lucy Trimnall, Yasmin Omar, and myself, and we're going to be discussing some of the more interesting things that have been going on recently in education. Before we get into that, it would be remiss of me to not mention our amazing sponsors on the show this morning and on all our shows. John Catt Educational. If you haven't heard of them, they're an educational publisher. They publish books and resources worldwide for teachers, and you can visit johncattbookshop.com. and you can use the code JCTTR2425 to get 20% off any number of books that you decide to purchase through their website, thanks to John Catt. So thanks for the discount, John Catt, and head over there and, get involved. Right. How is everybody this morning? Are we well?
Good, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Sounded really convincing. I don't think people are well. But, whatever. Tojinder, I think you are gonna maybe kick us off with the first point of view. Now, I don't want to speak for you, but I will speak for you. I feel like your point of view is going to be that you believe that Michael Gove and Amanda Spielman should get honours.
Yes, so there was an announcement. I mean, it has been relatively quiet because obviously it is the Easter holidays. But there was the announcement that the former Officer Chief Amanda Spielman would be made a Conservative member of the House of Lords, and Michael Gove would be has been awarded a peerage. So in terms of Amanda Spielman, she was the head of Ofsted. However, she served 2 terms. So she actually served quite a bit of time, actually, and had a, I think, really positive influence in terms of the curriculum, by having the curriculum unit, by really sort of like diving into these areas and supporting that knowledge-rich curriculum, by sort of, just giving that advice that teachers needed to be able to improve what they were teaching. And she had a lot of substance, but equally she had been, she was chair of Ofqual before then, and she was also a research and policy director at Arc Academy Trust. So it wasn't just to do with the fact that she was part of Ofsted. She has had quite an impact on education in lots of different ways. And the second person is Michael Gove, who it's funny because I'm just reading the article, but it's saying that he was the longest serving education secretary, which doesn't mean much from the previous government, let's be honest, because like they were there for about 2 seconds. I'm sure there was somebody who was just there for a week at one point, so, but he was, and I think his and again, I wouldn't say that the curriculum was perfect, but what the direction that he took us in meant that we didn't go down the route that Scotland ended up going down, which really did hammer their education system. Like when you stop and think that the Scottish education system had been the results in Scotland had always been higher than those in England, on international tests, etc. And whatever you believe about those, at least it's a measure. But they had always had a better education system, and because of the route they went down in terms of getting rid of subjects, in terms of sort of having sort of generic skills-based curriculum, it meant that actually that they ruined their own education system effectively. I know there are academics who won't admit to the fact that they are wrong about this, even though they are, because it can't always be down to just teachers, because every single teacher cannot be getting it wrong in Scotland. Quite frankly, it is your curriculum. And instead, he chose a different route, which meant that we actually improved our outcomes. And yes, there's still lots of things a lot of way to go. It's certainly correct that, you can see where Michael Gove had expertise and where he didn't. But I think he is responsible for that direction that we're in. That direction that we took, and it was the right direction, particularly for disadvantaged children. And I think that was something quite important about him, which is that actually, whether the left like it or not, he did criticise them directly on their results of what their results were on disadvantaged children. I think actually, even though I wasn't a Conservative at the time, or I wouldn't have said that I was I definitely wasn't a member. I was actually a member of the Labour Party at the time. However, I remember being really quite taken aback and going, well, actually, there's a lot of sense in what he's saying, because there are genuinely issues with the education of disadvantaged children, which I'd seen, because that's all I've ever done. And yet it was not being raised. And I think that too often, because so many of these mistakes come from the left themselves, they cannot almost face up to it. So it did have to take a Conservative in the end to be able to go, look, you're getting things really wrong, and you're getting them particularly wrong for those most disadvantaged children out there. And don't forget, I know people don't like it, but he did come, he was adopted. He did come from, sort of like relatively humble background himself. And, I do think that genuinely he did care about those, the most disadvantaged children. I think, he knew what it was like for himself and for his sister. And he also knows that if he hadn't have been adopted into that particular family, he might have had quite a dire outcome. And I think that did come across, even though I think he's rogue in lots of ways. I'm not saying he's always done the right thing. I'm not saying he's perfect. But I do give him a lot of credence for that. And same thing with Spielman. I think she's done a lot of good. And I think, yes, you can criticise her for what happened during one Ofsted inspection, but I don't think that a person should be judged by just one Ofsted inspection itself, and that's it.
Was it not her reaction to what happened after that Ofsted inspection? Because I don't think anyone says the result of the inspection itself maybe was directly on her fault, but it was the way they responded, and the government really chose to die on the hill of, no, we're not getting rid of one-word judgments, and seemed to show it showed an attitude that was felt to be very inflexible and quite insensitive in the moment.
But having said that, a lot of people did just jump on it, and quite frankly, there was a lot of wrong being done in terms of how that, in terms of coroner's report, in terms of how people jumped on it. Everybody knows that, it's always been, from the Samaritans, it's always been their advice that you cannot say that a single factor has caused a suicide, because it's rarely true. So actually, I think what she was trying to do...
They didn't say that, though, did they? They didn't say that. The inquiry said that it contributed towards... It said that the school's inspection had contributed towards her death. That's what the inquiry into what happened with Ruth Perry said. So it didn't say this is what caused it. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, if an inquest is saying that something contributed in that way towards someone's death, then that's a very, very significant thing to conclude in an inquiry. And do you disagree with the outcome of that inquiry, Tarjinder? Do you sort of...
I think what you're talking about is somebody who was clearly under a lot of pressure. And
come on.
But you're talking about...
Well, where was that pressure coming from? I mean, That's kind of the point here. The level of pressure placed on heads by Ofsted, no one would say it's light or it's trivial. It's very, very serious. Now, obviously, in this case, that wasn't the only factor. Of course, it wasn't. But we all know how serious it is for heads. And I think people felt sympathy with the pressure that Ofsted places on.
But it also just wasn't in for everybody who hates Ofsted. Do you see what I mean? It's
yeah, of course. I mean, but that will always happen.
Let's hammer Ofsted on everything. Because
that doesn't mean the charge isn't true, though. The fact that critics...
No, and I'm not saying that it didn't contribute. The point is that at the end of the day, it's really sad and unfortunate that it happened. But I don't think that Amanda Spielman's entire career can be that it should override what she did. That this should be the one thing that we all consider, and we forget everything else that she's contributed to education. If she deserves a peerage, it's not just because of one.
But what has she contributed?
What do you mean?
Well, as far as
I've already spoken about that. If you look at nothing else, if you look at, and I don't think Amanda Spielman had never made any mistakes. That's not true. But if you look at the work of the curriculum unit, for example, that existed in Ofsted, it did produce significant reports onto each of the different subject areas, which I think were really helpful in terms of moving things forward and improving outcomes, right? And yes, some of that still needs to be implemented, but I do think they were trying to be helpful and not trying to just hinder schools or just to go in there and inspect. I think, we've always had an inspection regime. People can disagree on what that inspection regime is going to be, but the point is, even now, people aren't happy. No one's really happy. I don't think it matters which system that you put in place. There will always be somebody that will be unhappy about what the system is or the lack of one. And we can't have a situation where we have a lack of one, because quite frankly, it will mean worse outcomes for certain children. We already know that. Right?
Spielman did.
what should she have done? She also did, she was head of Ofqual as well, and she did do amazing work there too.
But she's never been. Tarjinder. She's never been a teacher. She's never been a school leader. She
also did things like take Ofsted to different conferences. She made her own presence there. She did but she did, and she did help. She did try and get the views of ordinary teachers and leaders into her own inspection team.
Well, that's one view on that. I mean, obviously, my view on that is that attending things like teach meets and conferences and events was more like a PR thing. It was about saying, okay, by me being here, I'm one of the people, and I'm one of you, and I'm really interested in listening to what you have to say. But there was no evidence during her tenure that she was listening to the people who were constantly saying the grading system, which existed and was a big factor in all the terrible things that happened towards the end of her tenure. She made no concessions on that whatsoever. No sort of...
But if she doesn't agree with you, then why should she have to make concessions? Genuinely, you can have a genuine disagreement with her. But I don't. That does not make her a bad person, because she just wouldn't back down.
I haven't said she's. I
don't think she's saying she's a bad person.
I don't think. But
Tarjinder, you were talking about the intention of Ofsted. I don't think you can criticise Ofsted by still at the same time not. You don't have to say Ofsted has bad intentions in order to criticise it. You can say the people signed up for the right reasons and they're coming in schools to help improve them. But one big criticism of Ofsted is that it's too thinly stretched. You get a couple of inspectors. They have maybe 2 days to arrive at a school, find out what's going on, do the report and everything, and they come out with these sweeping judgments afterwards, which have real consequences that will affect the school for years to come. So you don't have to say an inspector was poorly intentioned or whatever. You just have to say they are not given enough resources to do their job properly. And that is a very valid criticism of the Ofsted regime.
Yep, and I don't think it's about, calling her a bad person. I think it's just about accountability. I think when I first heard that Ruth Perry story, one of the things that got me the most was, reading about the fact that she actually went to the school as a child where she became a head teacher. And I just think it was about accountability, and I just felt like the way that it was addressed was actually quite cold. And if anyone deserves credit, it's her family, who would have been grieving, that I feel like made so much effort, and all the school staff who got on board as well to try push for changes in Ofsted like that. In that period of time, I feel like that's what stood out to me the most. And to have seen that, I don't know, I just felt like it. To me, it just felt like another example where, the lives and the well-being of teachers isn't really taken seriously.
Absolutely, and the head of Ofsted, whether you like it or not, has. But the head of Ofsted has a political element.
That this person does not take those people seriously. That's just not a fair accusation. That's not true. That's just not true.
Hang on.
No, but that's not true. And also, sometimes people do have to act and behave in certain ways when you're running a really large organisation where you've got thousands and thousands of people. Actually, it takes certain skills, and you can argue that maybe she should have been warmer, but that's not the point. People react the way they react.
But it is the point. Ofsted can work with the profession or be perceived to be working against it. And there is an element of PR, there is an element of politics to it. It is a bit of, you have to have a political skill because politicians get involved with education all the time, of course they do. So if you're going to be the head of an organisation at Ofsted, you have to have the political skill and to be able to read the room, to realise when there's a time for sticking to your guns, and realise when there's a time for humility, and there's a time to sort of build, to mend bridges. And I think it was felt by many people that I can't remember who mentioned coldness earlier, but that's what they will think of when they hear her name. Now, you're absolutely right, Tarjinder. It may seem unfair for her whole career to be sort of judged by one incident. You may say that, and that's right. But that is the nature of the beast. If you're going to be head of an organisation like Ofsted, you will... It can be a savage game working in the public arena, but that's the political side of it. I think it's unavoidable.
Can I just... Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Go on, because you're still conversing on this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and also I think what makes that point, Will's point, really important is what Tom said about the inquiry. It's not just like hearsay, or it's not just speculation. That the inquiry actually said it was a contributing factor, to Ruth Perry's death. And so for me,
she
even
also,
though
Spielman completely went against the outcome of that inquiry. She said
it was weird, yeah.
She said she thought Ofsted did exactly this is a quote, did exactly the right thing at the right time. She said that she did absolutely the right thing at a tremendously difficult time when it would blah blah blah, right? She apologized for the distress that had been created, but she didn't at any point say, you know what, like, agree with that inquiry. So that's why I was coming back to my original question to Tarjinder of, do you agree with the inquiry result? Because it's a yes or no. It's not, well, I sort of do, but I'm not sure. Like, do you agree?
What's happening is, you've got to think, she's thinking about the process that other inspections go through, right? What happened there any particular, did those inspectors do anything particularly different compared to other inspectors on other inspections? Do you see what I mean? She's looking at the overall picture, and if the answer is no, there wasn't anything significantly different, then what is she supposed to say?
But
they changed the system.
When you say the process itself,
no, if they'd acted and behaved in a way that was different to the normal process, if they'd said things, if they'd gone about things in a different way, then she could point to that and say, yes, this is where the mistake was made. But if it's the exact same process that's happening in schools up and down the country, and the difference is that the head teacher is not in a sort of situation where it tips her, like, because obviously what happened tipped her over the edge. She was obviously,
well, the coroner, based on the evidence at the inquiry, the coroner's report described the inspection as, quote, rude and intimidating.
But that's something that that's in their opinion, but they are not.
So that's why I'm asking: do you agree with the coroner's report or not? Because if you don't, that's a different argument, isn't it? If you're saying I don't believe in the report,
they've said that this is what they believe, right? But my point is still the same, which is that, is it different? Did those inspectors actually talk to that person differently compared to other times they've been on inspection? Do they do anything different?
But that sounds like victim blaming, Tarjinder. That sounds like victim blaming, because that to me sounds like saying, well,
no,
if
that's a silly thing you're saying, Yasmin. It's a silly little point, quite frankly. I'm not having
that.
No,
can I finish?
It's a serious point. Did they say and do things differently on that inspection compared to any other one? Now, that coroner would not have known that, because that coroner, is not their job to be.
I'm saying to you, Tarjinder, rather than thinking about the impact, let me speak, please. I feel like rather than considering the impact the normal procedure in itself has on teachers or head teachers, you're basically saying if other head teachers could have coped with it, then a particular head teacher couldn't. That's what it sounds like. That's why I'm saying victim blaming.
That is the process. But the point is that, look, if I've gone through periods of actually being depressed, so I know what it's like when you're in that situation and how awful it can be, right? And what can tip you over, and do you see what I mean? Like, what can make a difference? Like, when you've had that situation, you've been in and out of it, you get that, right? What I'm trying to say is that someone could have spoken to me in a particular way when I was depressed compared to what I'm like now, and it would have a different impact on me. You can't just pretend that a person's depression doesn't have an impact on them. It does, right? So to that extent, it's not Amanda's fault. It's not the fault of necessarily the individual inspectors. Now, if it was what she was trying to say was that, look, if they haven't actually done anything different, what was she supposed to criticise?
Are we supposed to celebrate an inspection regime that places that much stress?
No, you don't have to. And I think you can also make an argument that says actually the process itself is just complete. You can disagree with the process completely, but what Amanda was trying to say was that she could not find fault with those particular inspectors because
the coroner's inquest said they were rude and intimidating. The coroner listened to a lot of evidence from a lot of people, right? During that,
but what they've never done is seen more. That's the only inspection they were actually judging. They were not judging like how this process.
I know they were. They were talking about that inspection, and they said that inspection,
and for good reason. I mean, there's a reason coroners don't look at these other terrible thing.
They judged that Ruth Perry's mental health deteriorated during that inspection, and they detailed lots of the different meetings that she had to have during that inspection with the inspectors where, this whole idea that they were rude and intimidating came from. It's not that was just based on sort of, I felt rude and intimidated. No, this was based on meetings where what they'd actually said was read out. What they actually did was read out interactions they actually had was read out during that inquest. And then at the end, the coroner said they were rude and intimidating, and that led to the sort of outcome and the way things went. Now, if I'm this is what I don't understand with Spielman. She just would not say, she said on a podcast afterwards, she went on, I think it was Woman's Hour or something like that. And she said she was asked that, you were leading Ofsted at a time of a fabulous, much loved head teacher's death. And she said, quote, "It was deeply, deeply unpleasant. So you'd see Guardian headlines saying, quote, Ofsted is failing because it's not supporting schools. It's a bit like saying the driving test agency is failing because it's not giving people driving lessons. The reason she found it unpleasant is because of the pressure it was putting on her and her organisation rather than what had actually happened. It wasn't about, this has been a terrible thing that's happened, and this is why I feel terrible. No, it was deeply unpleasant for me because I had to read headlines in the Guardian about me. Oh, poor Amanda. Honestly, right, listen, she's the head of an organisation. Yeah, sorry, but I can't sort of buy into that really sympathetic line with her. She had so many opportunities, so many chances after it happened to come back and be more accepting and acknowledging and genuinely apologetic. But every time she went on so many podcasts and news outlets, did all these interviews, she went with Laura Kuenssberg, she went on Women's Hour, she went on all these podcasts. It was the same thing. I'm really sad, but I'm more sad that there's people attacking Ofsted as a result of it.
How dare people make a judgment about Ofsted, a simplistic one-word judgment about an organisation. What a terrible thing to happen.
I think Lucy's got something to say. Yes.
Well, all I wanted to come in and say is that I think people look at, these knighthoods and all of these things, and they say, well, this is unfair. I don't like this person, because there's never going to be one universal person, maybe the Queen, who could have been bestowed something that would have been reasonably universally agreed upon. But we do need to look at appointments to the Lords as what they are. This isn't something where necessarily people are saying you're a really good person and I want to reward you for your wonderfulness. It's about saying this lady has got years of experience working around education, of inspecting education, of leading change in education, and her role in the Lords will be to scrutinise and to look through legislation around education and to make decisions based on that. And so for me, I think we may be getting very angry with her as a person because she didn't react well to a situation which I feel she there were other circumstances around this lady's suicide that weren't that were already there when she made the decision that she couldn't live anymore, and it was terribly tragic, and Amanda Spielman may well have handled that far better. But I think that we have many Ofsted inspections happening all the time, and inadequate comes up. It was in a school that I worked in, and it didn't lead to those outcomes. So I think to say that it was purely,
it has in 13 cases. We know of 13 cases where someone has taken their own life after an Ofsted inspection, a school leader. We know of 13 cases that exist. It's just that this one was much more highly publicised and much more, the circumstances of it made it much more of a big thing when it came to the media. But actually, we know of 13 others that's happened. We know of many other heads who have sort of had breakdowns. They may not have. That's obviously the really sort of far end.
Just say
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalised feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favourite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
It's about Ofsted. Okay, people like.
No, I didn't say it was. In anything I said, I didn't say it was. But
doesn't place like massive pressure because I think I do appreciate that. I do get that, having worked in schools for long enough, that it does have this massive like pressure on head teachers. But there are also people sometimes who will go into jobs that they're not that they're not right for. Okay, there's going to be people who become head teachers and regret it because actually they're not right for that job. But it does happen. And let's not forget that actually the leap between teacher and leader is quite large. And so sometimes these mistakes will happen. Okay, and there's not always the correct training either. So people do make the wrong decision, and people do come in and out of SLT precisely for that reason. Because sometimes they go, actually, do you know what? I shouldn't have stepped out. I shouldn't have become an assistant principal or a principal. Actually, it's not the right thing for me. So you can't just say that the only reason why someone might feel that way or why they feel under pressure is because of Ofsted. It's not the only reason.
What about
I didn't say it was the only reason.
What about Gove? What about Gove? Was it both of them?
Before Gove, because this links in, Yasmin, to what you've just said. I wanted to ask Lucy though, because this whole idea that just being in the House of Lords is procedural and it's something that is helpful, blah blah blah. It's still a reward. It's a reward.
It's absolutely an endorsement. Yeah,
it's an endorsement and it's a reward. So with regards to Gove, I have less of a view because I don't know. I mean, I know the basics that Tojinder said, but I don't know. But with Spielman, she is being rewarded for failure. She's being rewarded for being the head of an organisation at a time when a terrible thing happened and she took no responsibility for that. And now
you can't say the entirety of it was a failure. That's just not right. It's not right.
You can pick anything from what happened with Ruth Perry and say that was a success. Are you saying there was something out of that where
what you're saying is that just one thing should be able to blight your entire career? And
in some cases, yes. In some cases,
what it is. Yeah, absolutely.
We disagree, don't we? Because I think it shouldn't blight her entire.
I mean, you're saying Amanda Spielman is responsible for the death of that head teacher.
No,
I'm
not saying that. Absolutely not. No. I'll say exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying she was the head, the boss of an organisation that was responsible. Or was partly responsible because that's
partly. She didn't know. She wasn't at that inspection.
Partly responsible for someone's death.
She wasn't at that inspection. She wasn't there. I don't even know. Did anyone go back in afterwards and re-inspect the school and say actually it was wrong, or was the school actually inadequate? Did it need those changes being made?
Having read the Ofsted report, it actually seems like quite a good school. Frankly, they failed on one point of safeguarding.
Yeah.
I haven't read it for a while, but from my memory, it was quite a technical thing about how they kept their written records around certain issues, and it was quite a quick fix, and it sounds like something they were able to address pretty quickly. Apart from that, the kids were happy. The learning, the teaching was judged as good. It sounded like a brilliant school.
But if your safeguarding isn't in place, if your safeguarding isn't effective,
Which
then
was
are
one
you
issue.
a really good school? You know,
Well, it was excellent teaching and learning. I mean, it was something about where exactly some records were electronic, some were
it was
written,
record keeping. It was around record keeping. I mean, I think
which is obviously important. Which obviously needs to be addressed.
It is important.
I think the way they've changed it in hindsight,
but that is one of those aspects of the head teacher's job that is part of actually their standards, right?
But
the safeguarding element is part of their standards, quite frankly. So you cannot say that you're doing the right thing if you don't have decent standards on that.
Give people, saying you're inadequate, saying right, we're going to slap on this inadequacy.
That is how that
is one word judgment again. That's
no.
the issue.
Instead of saying, we'll give you a day to sort that out.
If you fail on safeguarding, you fail. It's simple as that. Right?
We'll give you a date. We'll give you a couple of days. If that's the only thing that you've picked up, but you're going to slam me as inadequate.
Okay,
with that.
the point
give me a day to fix it.
Serious than that, you don't know, do you? Because
if that's a culture of poor record keeping, but if it's a culture of poor record keeping, then obviously that's a problem. And so
like John says, it's a quick fix.
Go away. If you could fill out your records properly, then everything will be fine.
Your views on what Ruth Perry should have done seem to be a lot less sympathetic than on the things that Amanda Spielman's done. You seem very, very she's inadequate because of this with Ruth Perry. But when it comes to Amanda, Amanda was under pressure. Amanda was hurting. Amanda has done lots of good things with the curriculum.
But I'm not saying that.
Getting a free pass.
I'm not saying that.
I don't think Lucy is saying that quite frankly. That's really unfortunate, Tom, because actually the fact of the matter is it's pretty clear that if you're safeguarding, if your records are not being if you've got a problem with your records, you will fail, but everybody knows that. Even the training that heads of teachers do get, and they do get support with some of these things. And yes, it does also happen that sometimes they don't follow procedures. I know of a school where a similar thing happened, and yes, they did get inadequate, and it was fair because they hadn't been keeping those records. And we know how important it is those records are kept to keep children safe. That's what it's about. It's not about being against head teachers. It's not about putting more work on them than they need to. That's just part of their job. It's like saying to me, right, well, you didn't have a lesson and therefore you were judged badly by an inspector. Okay, but it's my job to have a lesson to teach, right? Like there are things that are just part of your job, and either you get them right or you don't. And if you don't get them right, then there will be a problem.
And there is this feeling that Ofsted isn't there to help; it's there to catch people out.
Yeah, but
and that's where all the stress comes from.
There was nothing new about the expected standards. Nothing's massively changed in terms of how you're supposed to have records kept in the last decade, 20 years.
And that sounds so reasonable when you say it like that. But that is clearly not the message that she got after the inspection and the way it turned out.
Also, what we won't know, because I know of a school that was judged inadequate because of their safeguarding, and there were safeguarding issues amongst some of the students, and quite significant ones in some places. And I guess the Ofsted inspection doesn't go and investigate those. They just say your record keeping isn't good. So we don't know what was going on behind the scenes in terms of what effect that had on students in the school. And so it's
I'm pretty sure the report said the children at school were happy, they enjoyed going to that school, they were polite and they loved learning.
But that's an overall. That's not all of the children. And where there are safeguarding issues, surely we would all agree that it's essential they're recorded properly and dealt with effectively.
But again, I mean, I absolutely agree. Of course, safeguarding is incredibly important. No one would dispute that. And what you're saying, when you say it here, it sounds so reasonable and such a small thing. But why did this happen? If it was such an easy thing to fix, and
you can disagree with this, that's fine. But you cannot say that any head teacher in the last sort of 10, 20 years has not had a good understanding of what the record keeping should be. They may not have always
So why didn't she do it then? In that case, why didn't she do it?
No, but nothing has massively changed. And equally, in terms of the inspections, everybody knows that record keeping, whether it's good or if it's not good enough, then you can fail on that. So again, that's something that's open and has been out there. It's not something you wouldn't know.
You can fail on anything. You can fail on anything in the inspection.
No, but with safeguarding, it will be, even if other areas are fine. If safeguarding isn't fine, you will get inadequate. We do know that, and that has been the way.
No, but they've also said that if leadership, they also used to say that if leadership and management is less than I can't remember what it was. It was less than good or something. Then it wouldn't matter what all the others were. Leadership. Oh, was it the other way around? Was it when they said
no? The safeguarding.
Leadership and management can't be good if certain other areas aren't good, right? So you're inadequate or requires improvement if some of the other areas. Which again is an example.
We're discussing a moot point because the new government have changed the inspection regime. It's going to be much kinder.
No, but we're discussing
Amanda
Spielman. We're discussing if Amanda Spielman.
We're not. It's gone on.
We are.
To.
We're getting away from it, which is great for people who want to get away from it. But we're getting away from accountability from Amanda Spielman.
Yeah, can I say as well? Look, I agree with Tarjinder and Lucy in saying that I don't think it should blight her entire career. Yeah. However, I do think accountability is important. And if anyone is defending Amanda Spielman, I feel like it's actually really important to not put down or speculate about Ruth Perry, because I feel like a big difference between them as well, irrespective of the published Ofsted report, one of them is actually alive to speak for herself, whereas one of them isn't. And, that, really stands out to me. Like, I agree it shouldn't blight her entire career. And I can understand that there will be times where, her previous experience or her overall experience, will be considered for different roles or whatever. But like Will and Tom did also rightly point out, this is something that gives her credibility, or like it is kind of like a reward, as they said. And I feel like even if people support her getting that, there shouldn't really be any criticism or speculative criticism about Ruth Perry retrospectively in the defense of Amanda Spielman. Like, I feel like that's wrong as well.
But the only reason people don't want...
But it is, though, because you guys are talking about, whether or not, she knew how to keep safeguarding records and stuff. I just don't think
I think Tom was referring to the coroner's report. That's not speculation.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking about you guys.
You see, this coroner's report has been brushed over in this conversation a little bit. The outcome of the report, what they said in the report about the inspectors being confrontational, intimidating, all the stuff I've read there about the way they had meetings that were grossly inappropriate throughout the inspection. And then following that, you know what? Right, if that had happened and everything that had happened, and then Amanda Spielman had reacted over the next year in a completely different way, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We'd have said, Amanda, she took it on her shoulders. She recognized that under her leadership, her organization had contributed to the death of a head teacher. She took that on board. She accepted it. She said, yes, I have done wrong. And do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sort of, I'm going to take that away. I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to go and reflect somewhere, and I'm going to go off. But no, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to do consultancy in schools. I'm going to go on 15 podcasts. I'm then going to accept a commission into the House of Lords. I'm going to do this, because I'm still an expert on education. I'm really sorry. And she's never been a teacher or school leader herself.
Yeah.
So I struggle with it. This isn't because I understand, Tarjinder, what you're going to think this is from me, which is, Tom's anti-Offset, so therefore anything that happens, I get it. Anything that happens with Offset.
What you're doing is you're indulging in a lie in itself, which is that there is a way of which is there is a better way of inspecting schools, and that Offset is the problem. There's always been inspection of schools. That will always have to be. There's no perfect system out there where people are just going to, judge themselves. There are bad faith actors within education as much as anywhere else. There are people who fail. And they are real children who get failed and who've been failed in certain communities repeatedly over and over again. And that needs to stop. And someone does have to come in and say it sometimes, because otherwise the outcomes for those children will be poorer.
Well, they don't in some other countries. Some of the countries have very different regimes and very minimal sort of light touch, inspections and different then peer reviews and all these other things, right? So we're talking about England specifically and their inspection regimen, but actually, if you look at other countries, they have very, very different.
And I'd have to see how effectively they tackle, like, for example, poor outcomes. Like, you can't say
there's about 20 countries. There's about 20 countries ahead of us, including countries like Finland in every measure you want to look at. So, actually,
Finland is not ahead of us in every measure that you want to look at.
Not every measure, but there's
their own outcomes are awful. Like, they've even had to admit that their own skills-based curriculum was rubbish. They've actually had to admit that.
There are countries where there are always countries ahead of the UK. So let's look at some other countries. Let's look at the countries around the UK as well. I think there's this idea that, and basing sort of this whole idea of, I'm not saying you're doing this, by the way, because I don't know what you're sort of basing your thought process there on, but this whole idea of, we got like 2 places higher on the PISA test, so therefore we're helping this and this. Like, again, it comes down to what you sort of trust and buy into, and the data that you buy into, and what sits behind that.
It's more than that. There's no denying that the curriculum up in Scotland's awful in comparison to what we've got. There's no denying it, right?
Well,
you cannot like the teachers.
I don't know, but I'm sure there are people who would deny it. There will be people out there who will deny it. Of course there will. There isn't every.
Because it's usually some academic who's got their hand in it and just cannot cope with it. But like my whole thing against education academics is like slightly. Well, that's just going off on a tangent now. That's a whole other rant.
Guys, I'm just going to quickly say this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Brilliant. Well,
next topic.
Next topic.
Next topic,
please. Time for go now. Next topic. Yasmin, you're going to sort of introduce us on this one, I hope.
Yes, I will. So the next topic is there was a research that claimed that race actually isn't a factor in school exclusions. And now some academics and other people, including MP Diane Abbott, have come out to actually say that it's nonsense and race is actually a huge factor in school exclusions. Now, one of the first things I thought about when I saw this was how I actually feel like a lot of the time, like I'm an advocate against exclusions. Obviously, we've had this discussion loads of times. I'm like worried about Tarjinder jumping on me like right now, but like I did want to say, like, I've made clear previously that I understand in the current system that we have, exclusions are necessary. And I said previously as well that, I'm a school governor and I've co-signed a head teacher's decision to exclude. However, I do think post-exclusion, there are a lot of issues. Anyway, one thing I did want to say, as somebody who's worked with a lot of advocates against school exclusions, especially people who are like against all school exclusions, is I do sometimes feel like people use outdated statistics, to be honest. I think a really common one that we see a lot is like, Black Caribbean boys are 6 times more likely to be permanently excluded. I used to see that on my classroom wall when I was at school. And, I think a lot of people don't know actually that I think the most common, or the group most likely to now be permanently excluded, are white British boys, I believe. And, I do sometimes feel like statistics for exclusions can be outdated. However, I do think that race, that there's still a lot of scope to discuss the impact of race and potential discrimination or prejudice in the teaching profession. And I think one of the other things that I thought about when I saw this article was just generally the lack of representation. Like there are a lot of, in teaching, there are a lot of people from ethnic minority backgrounds who say, they've lost out on a lot of roles, they haven't been promoted, they've never been able to break into senior leadership, or there are very few numbers. And so for me, I think another thing I just thought a lot about was, that I do feel like the lack of
separate things, Yasmin. They're two.
But they're not. For me, they're not two separate things, because I think
they are two separate things. A child being excluded is separate to whether or not you get promotion, because that can. There's multiple reasons why that may or may not happen.
I never said that they are the same thing, but I think they're linked. In a school, for me, I think, obviously as a Black person, as somebody in a headscarf, I think it's normal as a student to look to people or to, you know, think about who in teaching looks like you. And also,
certain people think and feel that way. Not everybody thinks and feels that way. And the problem is
they
that
don't have to. For the point stands, like they don't have to. Look, let me just finish my point, and I'll explain where I'm going with it.
Yasmin, talk about the research. All the research said was that if you look at other factors such as special needs, and you look at what was the other aspect?
Preschool meals.
If you look at poverty and special needs, that's a greater predictor of exclusions than race, right? That's all they said.
And I'm not against that.
What you've got is typical race baiting people like Kindy Andrews, and that's all he is. He's just a race baiter as far as I'm concerned. All he's doing is jumping in and saying, well, that research can't be right because it doesn't suit my ideology. Well, I'm sorry if it doesn't suit your ideology. If the truth is they are better predictors
I
of
think that's
exclusion, that's all it
patronising.
means. It doesn't mean that race is not any way, shape, or factor. But quite frankly, there might be research that contradicts what people like him say, because all he does is promote the idea that there's systematic racism. That's all he ever does. And he will not move away from that, no matter what the evidence suggests, no matter what. And all it is this American model being like shoved onto, like literally being superimposed onto Britain. And then we've got to look at it through this lens because it suits him. And he will not, and him and people like, I mean, Diana have a bit more respect for, but I think probably she is being a bit outdated on this. However, what we can't do is dismiss research for the sake of it if it's true. Now, that does not mean that there aren't other reasons, or that it's not actually like that there's no factor there to be taken into account. But if it is a greater predictor, that's all they're saying. They're not saying
that's fine. That's fine. But I want to finish my point. Now, whilst I agree that I agree totally that there are other stronger predictors of exclusion. However, you know, before exclusions comes behavior. And, you know, what my point was going to be is, you know, I do feel like race can play a part in behavior management or perception of certain students. Like if you take, for example, child Q, you know, this happened in an inner city London school where a child was strip searched and accused of, you know, carrying cannabis. And, you know, that's gone on to be an inquiry. So the point I was just going to make, Tarjinder, is I get it. Like I do agree there are probably other stronger indicators. However, you cannot ignore that race does also play or can play a role in the way certain individuals are perceived, and it can put certain children on a back foot more than others.
But that's not what these people are trying to say. What they're trying to say is that
it doesn't matter. I'm saying it. I'm just adding to the article.
But then you've got to say what is that precisely, so you can tackle it. But if what we want to do is tackle exclusions, and we really want to make a dent, then we're going to have to think about special needs, and we're going to have to think about poverty. Those are the two things that we've got to think about first of all. Because actually, you can be black and have special needs and be poor, and actually, it's being poor and being SEN that might be the thing that's actually causing the issue there. It may be lack of support. It may be that the school that you go to, because you are more disadvantaged, lacks resources. Do you see what I mean? Like there's other things, there's other reasons why you might end up in a situation where you're excluded. There's all sorts of like reasons why that might be the case. But just to look at race and say, well, we're just going to, because what a lot of these people want is just for them to, they just see any kind of exclusion of any child who's from an ethnic minority to be wrong and for it to be racist. And that's just not true.
That's not true either. That's not true. Like you're maligning people there. That's not true.
I'm not maligning him. No, I know what Kindy Andrews says.
But racism. No, but sorry. The one thing I will say.
I'm not maligning him. He is an ideologue, and he believes that is the case. He will not accept anything, any situation where a person from an ethnic minority is actually takes responsibility for their own behaviour. And sometimes people from different backgrounds will do bad things. Jasmine, yes, they will. And it's not because someone's been racist to them. It's because they're not a good person, right? There's good and bad in every community as far as I'm concerned, and you can't remove that, and you can't blame it on racism all the time either. Sorry.
But what is the reason that children are excluded for? Are they excluded because the teacher just doesn't like them, and that might be because of race, or it might be because of other things? It's generally behaviour, isn't it? It's generally behaviour or posing a threat. I mean, you know, at the school I was in, we didn't have a huge number of children from black or other backgrounds, large rural Somerset secondary school. But when children were excluded, it took months of behaviour traits to present before anybody could even begin to do anything about it. They always had to have a really watertight case. It had to go through the governors, which, Yasmin, you've said you are a governor, so you'll be aware of that. There are opportunities to appeal exclusions, which is why they have to be watertight, because I believe there are expenses attached if you incorrectly or wrongly exclude a student. So this isn't done lightheartedly or easily, or just a sort of, God, that kid gets on my nerves, I want them out. It really does have to have been proven as a case that child presents a risk or to learning or to the physical safety of other students. And so I don't see how it can be racially motivated, especially, well, I don't know.
Look, I'm not going to let's not pretend that there's never
Well,
been
it
a
could be.
backlash.
It could be on certain.
It
Of
can,
course,
guys,
it could be in
institutional.
certain.
Do you agree that institutional racism has?
No, I don't agree with that. It's a load of nonsense.
So there's no
Frankly.
institutional
No,
racism. in
it's not
schools.
systematic either. That's just an ideological point of view. You don't have the backing for it. All you're doing is taking your American ideology and superimposing it onto Britain, and therefore it does not make sense. It does not answer the questions, right? If we were genuinely going to be in the same situation, you'd have to ask yourself, why is it the white working class boys and girls have got the outcomes they do?
Which is what I started with.
You cannot argue institutional and systematic racism in a country where white working class children themselves end up with worse outcomes. That's not what happens.
I agree with you there. I agree with you.
Tajinda, let Yasmin make a point.
Look, that's literally what I started with, okay? I feel like white working class children are massively neglected. You know, I've previously worked in a school where not a single white British child had a positive progress score. And that's not a joke. Yeah, so like I completely agree with you there, Tajinda, which is what I started with. I said when a lot of people advocate against exclusions, there is often actually only a focus on some races over others. And I don't agree with that. A lot of people don't even know that the most excluded children from schools are white British children. Yeah, so I completely agree with you there, Tajinda. But I don't, even with you, Lucy, I agree that exclusions, you know, there's a lot you have to go through in order to exclude a child. But I don't think you can ignore that sometimes institutional racism, in my opinion, does exist or can exist. It can exist. And dismiss it as American, as if there aren't black people in this country.
For institutional racism to actually exist, for institutions to actually be racist, if you're talking about the systematic, are you talking about Kindy Andrews systematic, or are you talking about institutions? Because an individual institution may very well have people who are racist.
Well, thank you. That is what I was talking about.
No, an individual one, but you cannot
You keep derailing my point. I never said systematic. You did.
No, but the point is institutional racism, when it's spoken about in that respect, it's about our education system is in and of itself racist, and it cannot be. The evidence does not point to that at all. And that doesn't mean that racist incidents don't go on. It doesn't mean that people are always treated well. It doesn't mean that, you know, teachers and children themselves have not had racism directed at them.
So we agree.
But that is not the same institutional racism. It's individual level. That's what
we agree, Tajinda.
No, but Yasmin, but you're not, because you're just banding these ideas around, which are really unhelpful, right?
No, unhelpful to who? I don't know why you're so like. Look, I'm from the black community. Okay, I went to school with a lot of black people. I grew up on a council estate, and I also think, you know, this research is, in some points, quite simplistic. I was a poor black kid at school. So would it have been the fact that I was free school meals, or the fact that I was black, which would have been considered more important if I had been permanently excluded? Do you see what I mean? Like, a person is more complex. It's really hard to compartmentalize things about people. It's really hard to do that to a child.
Sorry. All they're saying is part of their research. This is their data set. This is their research. This is what they've done. And by all means, criticise that. But what it can't be criticised for is it just doesn't back up an ideological point of view. That's what it can't be criticised for. Right. So if you want to criticise research, by all means, look at.
I'm a scientist. I'm
look at the data set. Look at all those things. So I wouldn't mind if Kindy Andrews was saying that. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is actually anything that goes against my ideological point of view is wrong. Right? It's
that's
just
not
wrong.
What he's saying. That's very personal and patronising. Like, if you don't like him, you don't like him. That's fine.
It's not about liking or disliking him, quite frankly. It's about the fact that is what he does. And if you're going to behave like that, if you're going to say that I will dismiss any piece of research that does not suit my ideology, well, then you're going to get the respect that you
not what he
deserve, which
said.
is not very much, quite frankly. As a researcher, you've got to take on board that sometimes research will come out and it will challenge your assumptions, it will challenge your ideas. Now, that research could have come out and it could have been very much saying that actually race is a factor, and I'd have to look at that, because I, again, can't be ideological about this, because when we're talking about children, it is important to make sure that they are not suffering as a result of prejudice against them on certain basis, right? I mean,
he did so in the article. He said, to quote what he said, it's nonsense. We have the data which has said for a very long time that black students and Roma gypsies are more likely to be excluded and suspended temporarily. But researchers have, which I think is wrong on that
Say
point.
that again, sorry, Tom. I didn't hear. What groups did he say?
So he said that the report, the research is nonsense. We have the data which has said for a very long time that black students and Roma gypsies are more likely to be excluded and suspended temporarily. Now, I'm saying I think there is evidence to suggest more recently that the number of black pupils who have been suspended or excluded versus white students has gone down. So is he wrong on that point? I don't know. I'm asking. I don't know.
I think he's choosing, like I said, he is choosing a data set that supports his ideological point of view instead of looking at reality for what it is. Look, over time, data sets might very well change. You may very well find that, for example, for whatever reason, in like 10 years' time, for a wide variety of reasons, all of a sudden, girls from like Indian backgrounds are more likely to be excluded. Like, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but if that genuinely was what was happening, you'd have to go, actually, hang on, exclusions and permanent exclusions or suspensions have gone up in that community, right? For whatever reason, or for the children in that background, it may very well be that, what we find is that as people, as different groups integrate, so for example, one of the things is, like family breakdown does have an impact on children on terms of behaviour, right? So when I was growing up, it was very rare for children. But it does actually, and you can raise your eyes at that, but it's the truth. And Yasmin, again, you're just being ideological because you just don't like the fact that fathers.
I think just speak for yourself, Tajinder, not for me. Like,
no,
okay.
but you're rolling your eyes, and that's just rude.
Yeah, you're rude. Like, you're being rude as well. I love you.
Because you're never going to admit the truth, so therefore you can't.
But this is what Tajinder. What is so funny about you is what you say. Like, you talk like what you're saying is fact. You're like, you're never going to admit the truth. Like, it's like only your opinion is right, but it's an opinion.
No, but I'm a
family. You bring it back to family breakdown again. You are maligning parents.
Yasmin, was that as groups like the Indians have integrated, as there is more likely, as they have got, and with more family breakdown, it may very well be that has an impact on their exclusion rate. Like, so that is just one factor, but it could be the case that in 10 years' time, we then look and say, actually, hang on, for whatever reason or for various reasons, you're more likely to get exclusions from that community, right? You cannot just go, oh, I've got this static data set that suits my ideology. We're never going to look at another data set ever again. We're never going to look at any factor, because that's not help. That's not about helping.
Do you think integration is a factor?
Who are being excluded is about helping.
Do you think how a community integrates then is a factor? You basically
no,
say...
No. I'm just throwing out what I was doing, Yasmin, was just throwing out a hypothetical scenario. Okay, like what could be happening that means all of a sudden this other group is all of a sudden they're more represented in terms of exclusions than they were in the past. Of course, things may very well change, and we've got to keep on top of that. What we can't say is we've got this data set that I'm happy with, and we're never going to look at another data set again.
Look,
it does seem a strange thing.
Sorry, Will. There are loads of things that Tajinder has said, okay, that I do agree with. And I do also totally agree with the fact that you can manipulate data to fit whichever argument you want to make. That's one of the great things about data. You can actually use it to support, whatever someone's ideology or point might be. But I think there are just a lot of things, Tajinder, that you can't ignore. I do think that there is a lot of disparity in education based on race. I think it's very hard to Let me finish.
Let Yasmin finish her point at least. Just let her finish her point.
Honestly, I feel like I can't hold my train of thought sometimes. But I feel like it's really hard to compartmentalize a child into something, just like race or just like poverty or SEND, just separate, like I feel like you have to consider the individual holistically. And sometimes I think you'll find that a child can fit more than one of those categories at once. And I think also, certain children might be more likely to have all three things, be at a disadvantage because of their race, their SEND, and because of poverty.
But also remember, expulsions are like, if we're speaking about all children in school in the country, expulsions are very, very rare, right? They make up a tiny amount of the overall.
I don't think they're rare.
Okay, but they make up a tiny amount of the overall school population.
They are rare.
All I'm trying to say is, if you're trying to make quite a big, grand, sweeping point about an entire nation's school system, it's a very, very small data set just to focus on. You've got to have other stuff there, and other data and other outcomes to talk about to inform the point.
But what I will say, I agree. So I was at the start, I was trying to take it away from just the article by saying before exclusions comes behavior. And I feel like it's actually important to consider things like institutional racism or lack of representation in teaching. The overwhelming majority of senior leaders are white.
And not reality. That's not reality. If the reality is that special needs has more of an impact, and that's where we need to spend the money, not on these ideological outcomes. Because quite frankly, Yasmin, what you don't seem to understand is we've had cycles of this before, where literally people just make money out of this school system. All it is, it's just like the DEI stuff. It's just a money making racket, and it doesn't.
That's easy for you to say because maybe you don't feel like your life or your outcomes.
It hasn't done it in the States. It hasn't done it here. It's happened repeatedly, but it's failed, and because it's not tackling the right situation, that's why it's failed. So if we're going to put money into initiatives, we at least need to look at what has worked and what has not worked, first of all, and secondly, look at something that's more evidence-based, not ideological based. I'm sorry, if you want to believe that in your la land, you want to believe that, let's do this, let's tackle institutional racism. At the end of the day,
and I'm the rude one.
No, nothing against black children, because you didn't actually tackle the actual issue, then there's no point in it. And like I said, we've had enough nonsense and fads and things like that within education.
Institutional racism isn't nonsense.
Doesn't exist, Yasmin.
It does.
No, it doesn't.
It does.
You're just lying to yourself because you want to be part of that.
The ad hominem is crazy, honestly. Like,
no, it's not ad hominem. It's the truth. If you want to be ideological, be ideological.
Agenda's opinion is the truth, guys. Breaking
Clara.
Thank you, Clara.
Thanks, Clara.
To round things up, she said I could do another hour. You're all awesome. Fantastic.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
It really is. It's fantastic. I do think, I mean, to be fair, all the way through, I think everybody's made some interesting points. I don't think there's been, I think there's been a lot of stuff to consider.
I think Tarjinder doesn't realize how much we actually have in common when it comes to behavior and exclusions. We actually have a lot.
I think she probably does,
and I agree with that. I agree that there are people who hijack things. I agree that a lot of the time there are people who've never been in a school, set foot in a classroom, who've got huge views on, teaching and teachers and what they should and shouldn't do. I think we have a lot of common ground, Tarjinder, but I definitely also think as well there is a lot more scope to consider things, the impact of institutional racism in education, and
but
it
the thing is,
Yasmin, students, it affects teachers too and their promotion.
But Yasmin, from what I'm picking up, and this is probably where yourself and Tarjinder aren't going to be able to agree. No. And again, Tarjinder, correct me if I'm wrong here. Tarjinder is saying that she doesn't believe that institutional racism exists.
And she said, "I'm in La La Land."
Yeah, you are.
Well, no, that was amazing. But besides that, she also said that
it's not real.
Right. So that's Tarjinder's point. So you're not going to be able to convince her on that.
No, I don't believe that ideology can apply to our education system when you look at the outcome. Because for it to be real, the outcomes for black children should be worse than white children. That's what it has to be.
No.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
No.
That's what it has to be.
No.
And because it isn't, people then go, oh no, actually, I don't like that data. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to pretend.
Okay, I'll answer that, Tarjinder. First of all, I think a child is more than just their P8. Also, if we had talked about Gove, I'm not a big fan of Gove, but one thing I will actually say I highly rate Gove for, if he's the one that was responsible, is P8, the introduction of P8, because in my opinion, that did reduce a lot of the prejudice or perceptions there were of particular ethnicities or whatever in education. Obviously I'm just one person and this is just completely anecdotal, but when I was at school, I did really well in every level of my education when it came to exams. But when it got to UCAS, I had teachers who said I wouldn't do better than a C, even in subjects I had an A star in at GCSE. And, I had white friends at school who didn't have the same experience or who weren't limited when it came to things like applying to university. And that for me was racial. But also, I was from a council estate. I was free school meals. How would you can't know, you can't know exactly what it is about you. But I think, a lot of the one thing I will say in defense of a lot of the advocates who, condemn articles like this, it comes from a place where even though Tarjinder now, I think things like P8 have really leveled the playing field for all children. And it's still really unfortunate that white British children are still massively, or white working class children are massively underachieving. And that to me is really serious. I think they are forgotten. I think they are left behind. And their
underachievement, Yasmin, is not necessarily to do with the fact that again, I'm the biggest advocate for responsibility and accountability for any person. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, the background or anything else. So when we sort of say, white working class kids, like they've been left behind, they've been ignored. Now some of that may be absolutely true. It may be true. I just sometimes sort of individual responsibility and accountability of students. So forgetting about anything else, because everyone has an opportunity in the UK to try and make the right choices, let's say, in education. Everybody has that opportunity. So it's like, where do you start saying, right, forget about all that other data stuff and just start concentrating on what are you doing? What are you actually doing to improve?
It's like when you have this phrase, likely to be expelled. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to defend every single one here, but bear in mind, over 20% of expulsion, second most likely cause is assault on another child. The third most likely cause is threatening a teacher. Fourth most likely cause, assaulting a teacher. These are very serious things, and it is overwhelmingly happening to quite older children as well. And there has to be some accountability there, surely.
I suppose that's another debate, though, isn't it? That's another debate.
Another thing I want to say, I remember seeing this infographic. It was data on initial teacher training, like people who apply for teacher training, people who get accepted onto it, and then people who progress onto like headship or senior leadership. And it was, the breakdown was based on race. And like when it came to Black people, from what I remember, I don't remember if it was Black and Asian people, or if it was just Black people, but I do remember the number of Black people specifically who applied to teacher training was actually higher than the number that got on. And then in every level of education just got lower and lower and lower. And, you know, that for me is something that's important and worth considering. Like, I think, you know, this is something that affects pupils and it's something that affects teachers.
No, well, data is only saying that, Yasmin, because I actually do agree with you that there's nothing wrong.
So I think it's important. Like, I'm not crazy, I swear. I'm not saying.
For example, you know, I also say it's important to look at. It's also important to look at, say, for example, the number of male teachers who don't want to be in early years. You know, things like that. You can. I don't think there's a problem necessarily to look into it, but then you do actually have to say
that's not the same. That's not the same as a Black person going to interview and getting rejected.
There are reasons why people might not feel like they can be part of the education system. I think it's fine to investigate those reasons, regardless of what the background is or what you think the problem is, right? But we also need to take into account that sometimes there will be people who will join the profession and leave the profession. It's got nothing to do with racism. It's just to do with who they are. And actually, you've got to be willing to accept that too. Sometimes people don't want to carry on doing a job for a particular reason. I was in education for a good, like, sort of 10 years, left for 3 years, came back in, right? So I've had periods where I've been in and where I've been out, but it was nothing to do with racism at that point in time. It's to do with workload, right? So I don't want people assuming why I left, because that's not right. It may very well be that there are various reasons why people leave, and we must.
Workload is probably the most common. Workload and behaviour are probably amongst the biggest reasons why teachers leave, but that to me isn't the same as someone repeatedly applying for a promotion and not being able to attain it despite the qualifications. And this is something, you know, that is not just racial, it impacts women more than men as well. And Lucy, you know, that's not the same as, like, you shouldn't also assume that everyone who left because they wanted to leave and not because they felt like they
I'm saying find out the actual reasons. Don't superimpose them onto people.
I wasn't, though. I feel like you were.
No, how have I done that? I've said we need to find out what the actual reason is. You're the one superimposing because you're insisting it must be racism, because you won't accept any of that.
No, I didn't insist it was racism. I literally just even agreed with you that workload and behaviour are a big part of why people leave. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, no, sorry, that there is definitely... In my opinion,
you keep going back to it, but it definitely is racism.
I haven't even finished my sentence.
Either, Yasmin, you may very
I wasn't even going to say racism.
Right? So in this case, if we genuinely care about young children, if we genuinely care about exclusions and reducing it, if it is about SEN, that's where our money should be going. If that is a better predictor, if that is what we need to tackle in order to reduce exclusions or to make it less likely to happen.
And I'm saying you can't compartmentalize. You can't compartmentalize a child. You can't look at just a child based on
because the only reason you're saying that is because it doesn't say race. Now, if it said race, you'd be all over it.
No, I didn't. I never said that.
That's the problem.
No, I didn't. No, it's not. No, I'm saying you can't compartmentalize a child. There are multiple times where I gave examples.
If that research had said race is a predictor, I'd have accepted it. I'd have accepted it in good faith.
Nobody has. Listen, Harjinder.
But the outcome is not the outcome that people want, because they want something else. This is still using public money, and we've got to think about how
nobody has just one protected characteristic. Okay, everybody will fall into more than one category. Okay, and it's important to consider an individual holistically. That's my point.
But you're not considering them holistically. If you then go, actually, I'm not going to take into account the main predictive factor. You can't just ignore it.
I wasn't against it. I said that like 20 minutes ago.
The point is, they're trying to. The point of disagreement there between those researchers and Kindy Andrews just stems from one thing, which is that Kindy Andrews did not want to accept a data set that does not support his point of view. That's all it is. It's not to do with the actual. He has not criticised the actual research itself because he can't, and also he also cannot maintain his own ideological stance if what they're saying is true. And that's a problem for him. It's not a problem for society. It's not a problem for schools. Schools need to get the best research they can and act on it and actually be accountable for the money that they spend. And like I said, if we need to put more money into SEND, then that's what we need to spend it on, rather than an initiative, a race-based initiative, which is not going to have the impact that you want it to have. And at the end of the day, we are responsible for that. What I don't want to see is this endless nonsense loops going around.
Guys, we are out of time. It's been a wonderful episode of Points of View. Thank you very much to everyone who's watched and enjoyed and engaged. We'll be back again next Sunday morning for more of this. You can't wait. Don't lie to yourself that you can't wait.
I'm going to miss you.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm not.
Like, this show's going to be like...
jolly.
This show's going to be like 20 minutes long next Sunday. Because like Yasmin will say something and Will say, yeah, sort of agree. And then Lucy will say, well, I might do. Yeah, like it'll be a much shorter show.
I can't wait.
I'm gonna finally be able to finish my sentences.
I'll be watching.
There you go. You'll find
shouting at the radio, no doubt.
About 50 texts, like there'll be about 50 texts. It'll just be us reading out texts for an hour.
Tajinda's just going to come up on the.
We won't have time to respond to each text. It'll be like, stop talking over me in text. Like. Anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure. We'll be back next week. Well, some of us will be. Take care. Have a really good week. Enjoy your holiday if you're on it. See you later, guys. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.